Coming up on today's edition of Airborne, Textron finally fesses up, yup, we bought Beech. The Embraer Legacy 450 makes its first flight. And Happy New Year, you're grounded. Those stories and more coming up on today's edition of Airborne. Welcome to Airborne on Aero-TV. I'm Ashley Hale. As we are wrapping up today's edition of Airborne, our newsroom got a late-breaking story. Jim Campbell is here to report.
Thanks, Ashley, and hi, folks. We regret to inform you that Mike Houghton, the president and CEO of the Reno Air Races, apparently has lost his job. In the 2 years since the 2011 tragedy that took the life of Jimmy Leeward and 10 spectators on the ground, times have been pretty tough for the Reno Air Racing Association. A statement released by them just a few moments ago basically states that, quote, in its ongoing effort to revise and evolve its organizational structure and business model to ensure long-term sustainability, the Reno Air Racing Association announced today the departure of its president and CEO Mike Houghton. The recently restructured board of directors cited recent changes in the governance of the organization and input from key stakeholders that emphasized the need to restructure the day-to-day operations in light of financial challenges facing the organization as reasons behind the departure. The statement goes on to explain that even as the National Championship Air Race is the only event of its kind in the world prepares to celebrate 51 years in 2014, the event continues to grapple with the financial challenges left in the wake of the 2011 tragedy, with costs having since quadrupled. They note specifically that operating costs have risen by nearly $3 million in the last 2 years. Obviously, there's a bit more news behind all this. We'll try our best to get as much detail as possible. We've known Mike for a long time. He was a class act and did an exceptional job for the organization, and we hope this belt tightening that apparently seems to be quite necessary doesn't harm the organization in the long term. We'll have more information when it becomes available. For the Aero-News Network, Airborne and Aero-TV, I'm Jim Campbell.
In a release issued as most of America was still scarfing up leftover turkey and stuffing, with extra gravy of course, GA's remaining all-American powerhouse Textron, the parent to Bell Helicopter, Cessna aircraft, and Lycoming engines, has officially commented and confirmed the purchase of Beech. Some new info indicates that under the terms of the transaction, Textron will acquire the Hawker 4000 and Premier 1A type certificates. Maintenance services for the aircraft will continue through Beechcraft's factory-owned service center network. Hawker Beechcraft services and authorized service centers around the world with Hawker 4000 and Premier ratings. Beechcraft will continue to provide uninterrupted service and support for all Hawker 4000 and Premier aircraft. More details will follow, and when they do, we'll keep you up to date. Happy New Year, you're grounded. That could be the message greeting hundreds, even 1,000 or more aviators on New Year's Day. If you're one of the unlucky ones whose aircraft registration expires on December 31st. Why? Because the FAA is woefully behind on its mandated 3-year re-registration program. And if your registration expires, it isn't renewed until the FAA says it is. The FAA, of course, is pointing a finger at sequestration, but saw to it that their personnel got paychecks, but were not allowed to report to work. So even though they have failed to do their job, it's you who will suffer the consequences. And you can bet there will be consequences. In case you're thinking of flying anyway with an expired registration, remember FAA guidelines call for a 30 to 90-day suspension of your pilot certificate and or up to a $10,000 fine for flying an unregistered aircraft. And depending on your state laws, doing so could be a crime or even a felony. Of course, the FAA could simply alleviate this issue by extending those delayed registrations for 30 to 60 days. But so far, it has not. Remember, don't drink and drive, and don't fly without a registration. The newest biz jet in the Embraer executive jet stable, the Legacy 450, made a successful first flight last Sunday. The 2 test pilots and a flight engineer flew the aircraft for 1 hour and 35 minutes. The maiden flight covered a significant range of the flight envelope and allowed for a variety of in-flight systems tests. The Legacy 450 is the first business aircraft in its segment with full fly-by-wire technology, featuring side-stick flight controls. The Legacy 450 is a mid-light business jet with a 6-foot flat-floor cabin. The 4 fully reclining club seats may be berthed into 2 beds. The in-flight entertainment system is extensive, and voice and data communication options are also available. The cabin includes a refreshment center at the entrance, a rear private lavatory, and a carry-on stowage area. The Legacy 450 is powered by 2 Honeywell HTF 7500E turbofan engines. With 4 passengers and NBAA IFR reserves, the Legacy 450 is capable of flying non-stop from Los Angeles to Boston or Moscow to New Delhi. Many have called sport and personal aviation the very foundation of the aviation world, and the staff of the Aero-News Network and the Sport Plane Resource Guide quite agree. ANN will be augmenting the impressive schedule of coverage that the Sport Aviation Expo has traditionally received. Current plans include dedicated episodes of Airborne covering all things Sebring, as well as 3 forum presentations featuring hard info on the LSA industry, presented by LSA expert Earl Downs. An even harder look at aviation marketing and the serious issues faced by the sport plane industry, conducted by ANN's Dr. David Jewell, and an unrestricted Q&A session with ANN's top editors and writers. Each of these presentations will occur in Forum Area 3 on the Sebring Airport grounds at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. ANN and the Sport Plane Resource Guide staff will be researching a number of new projects as well, including the next massive edition of the Sport Plane Resource Guide, a free sport plane mini guide that will be released shortly after the event, a look at the state of the companies in the sport plane industry, the final entrance in ANN's annual Flyers Dozen list of the best sport planes of 2014, as well as dozens of aero-tv features. Aero-News urges those aviation businesses with new products and offerings to contact ANN right away for possible coverage on ANN, the Sport Plane Resource Guide, or other programming from our network. It's said that the modern airline was born in Florida on January 1st, 1914, when a company called the St. Petersburg-Tampa Airboat Line, flying a Benoist 14 seaplane, flew 1 passenger at a time between the 2 cities for $5 each way. That's about $115 in today's money. It was the first scheduled passenger service. On January 1st, 2014, a team from the Central Florida aviation attraction Fantasy of Flight hopes to recreate those flights on the first flight's 100th anniversary. Fantasy of Flight founder Kermit Weeks is leading the team working to produce a replica of the Benoist. It's reported that Weeks has spent nearly $300,000 on the reproduction airplane. The team has been working 12-hour days over the holidays in an effort to get the airplane ready for its January 1st flight. Weeks told a TV station that, quote, "This thing is going to fly," end quote. If all goes according to plan, the 30-minute flight will depart from the water near the St. Petersburg Yacht Club and arrive about 30 minutes later near Peter O. Knight Airport. On January 6, 2014, Delta Airlines will retire its remaining Douglas DC-9 aircraft following Flight 2014, scheduled to depart Minneapolis-St. Paul for Atlanta. This is the last scheduled commercial flight of the DC-9 by a major U.S. airline. Delta was the launch customer for the original 65-seat version of the DC-9 in 1965, as the airline replaced propeller aircraft on high-frequency, short-haul domestic routes. Delta has flown a total of 305 DC-9s since 1965. The DC-9 retirement comes just months after Delta began taking delivery of its orders of 88 Boeing 717-200 aircraft and 100 Boeing 737-900ER aircraft, which began entering service in October and November. Delta also recently announced its orders for 40 Airbus aircraft, including 30 narrow-bodied A321s, which will begin to be delivered in 2016. To acknowledge the DC-9's retirement, the last flight has been tagged Delta Flight 2014, noting the final year of service, while the preceding flight operation from Detroit to Minneapolis-St. Paul will be Delta Flight DL 1965, the aircraft's initial year of service. The venerable DC-9 has served the airline industry well. Spacewalkers Rick Mastracchio and Mike Houghton completed a second spacewalk to install a spare ammonia pump module on Christmas Eve. Last Tuesday's main task included the removal and installation of a spare pump module. The first task was to remove the spare pump from the space station external stowage platform. After that was completed, the module was bolted to the S1 truss and connected to the station's external active thermal control system. Houghton attached himself to the external manipulating arm, called the Canadarm2, and took a ride to the worksite. Mastracchio tethered himself to the station and translated to the S1 truss to assist his partner. Japanese astronaut Wakata operated the Canadarm2 from inside the Destiny laboratory. Afterward, Houghton and Mastracchio completed electrical connections to the pump and successfully restored power. Flight controllers in the Mission Control Center at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston restarted the new pump. The new ammonia pump module is now considered fully functional. You're watching Airborne. More in a moment.
Since the early days of powered flight, pilots have struggled with landing in crosswinds and learning proper crosswind landing techniques. Even today, most crosswind landing skills are learned through trial and error, sometimes with disastrous results. Believe it or not, the most common contributing factor in weather-related accidents each year is crosswinds. The second most common factor is wind gusts. In fact, crosswinds and wind gusts cause more landing accidents than fog, thunderstorms, and icing combined. That's where the Redbird X-Wind SE comes in. It teaches pilots the proper techniques to meet and beat these top two causes of weather-related landing accidents. By placing pilots in gusty crosswind conditions for extended periods of time, the X-Wind SE gives instructors all the time they need to teach the pilot the proper techniques for landing in challenging crosswind conditions. For more information on Redbird flight simulations, the Redbird X-Wind SE, and Redbird's entire line of flight training devices, visit www.redbirdflightsimulations.com.
Over the past 2 decades, no resource has compiled as much expert-valued information about the sport plane world than the Sport Plane Resource Guide. Over 1,500 pages, hundreds of aircraft, dozens of how-tos and directories. All this and more will be coming to the sport aviation world soon with the new, all-electronic and updatable Sport Plane Resource Guide for your iPad, iPhone, Kindle, tablet, PC, or other electronic devices. Get your order in now. www.sportplane.com.
Welcome back. If you'd like to suggest a story for Airborne, Aero-TV, our website, or podcast, drop us an email to news-spy@aero-news.net. After nearly a century in obscurity, America's first airplane factory becomes visible again in Dayton, Ohio. The original Wright Company factory began to emerge on the former Delphi Home Avenue plant in West Dayton, as demolition crews razed other buildings to prepare the site for redevelopment. Public and private partners have invested approximately $5 million in the Dayton Aviation Heritage Redevelopment Project. Their goal was to preserve the 20-acre historic parcel that includes the Wright Company's factory and open the original 2 buildings to the public as a unit of the Dayton Aviation Heritage National Historic Park. Space will be available for new commercial construction, presenting an opportunity for aerospace companies to locate operations at the birthplace of America's aerospace industry. The U.S. Air Force could soon face a pilot shortage, given cuts in flying hours, low morale, and hiring pressure from airlines looking for experienced pilots to satisfy new FAA guidelines. Acting Secretary of the Air Force Eric Fanning said in an interview that there is grave concern that pilots in the Air Force may jump to the airlines because they simply aren't flying for the military due to funding issues. Fanning said that retention rates currently are better than average, but the concerns for an Air Force pilot shortage down the road are very real. The new FAA guidelines for flying time for first officers that gives a break to military pilots may draw these pilots to the airlines. Ex-military pilots can be hired as an airline co-pilot with 750 hours in their logbooks, rather than the 1,500 hours required for most non-military applicants. The Air Force does offer a signing bonus program in an effort to retain pilots in years when there are shortages. The Air Force reports that its retention rate is currently about 68%, but as the airline pilot shortage continues, that may change. And now it's time for Aero Video of the Week. In this week's video, you will share an oh shucks moment with the pilot of an MD-88. Watch closely as the plane turns onto the runway. Search Delta MD-88 skidding on takeoff on YouTube. The North American Aerospace Defense Command's NORAD Track Santa program exceeded its own records and the number of calls, emails, and social media followers this year. The program, which began after a misprinted ad in a local paper in 1955, has more than 1,200 volunteers, and NORAD staff answering questions on the location of Santa as he circles the globe delivering presents. The volunteers in the NTS Operations Center answered over 117,000 calls from children looking for Santa Claus. Military family members and community leaders volunteered their time to answer phone calls, as well as almost 10,000 emails. The First Lady, Michelle Obama, also helped answer NORAD Track Santa calls for the 4th year in a row. The NTS site, featuring Bing and Cessna maps and other interactive games, also offered photos, videos, and lots of fun facts about Santa and his reindeer throughout the month of December. Well, that's our program. Remember, you can get comprehensive, real-time, 24/7 coverage of the latest aviation and aerospace stories anytime at aero-news.net. And have a happy new year, everyone. I'm Ashley Hale. Thanks for watching.